You think reality flows. You imagine time as a smooth river, space as an unbroken stage, motion as something that slides from here to there. You don't question this. Why would you? Everything you experience agrees with it. Your hand moves smoothly. Your thoughts feel continuous. The world doesn't stutter. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't pause. So you assume continuity is fundamental. That the universe itself is smooth underneath. That nothing is missing between moments. This is the picture you carry without noticing. A quiet assumption, a dangerous one, because physics does not share it. At the deepest level we can probe, smoothness starts to fail. Not dramatically, not visibly, but decisively. The equations stop agreeing with your intuition. The concepts you rely on stop making sense. And continuity, this thing you never questioned, becomes an approximation. Not because we haven't measured carefully enough, but because there may be nothing to measure in between. Reality feels continuous. That feeling is powerful. That feeling is persuasive. That feeling may be wrong. You never decided to believe reality is continuous. It just arrived that way. From the moment you can remember, the world did not appear in pieces. It arrived as a single, uninterrupted experience. No gaps, no jumps, no seams. So the belief settled in quietly. This is how reality is, not as a theory, not as a conclusion, as a background assumption. You don't notice it because you don't need to. Continuity feels obvious. And obvious things are rarely examined. When you move your hand, it doesn't teleport. When you speak, words don't arrive one at a time as isolated bursts. When time passes, it doesn't announce itself in steps. Everything blends, so you learn without being told that blending is fundamental. But this is where the mistake begins, because feeling continuous and being continuous are not the same claim. One is psychological, the other is ontological, and you quietly replace one with the other. This replacement is not neutral. It shapes every question you ask about the universe. It shapes which explanations feel acceptable. It shapes what you're willing to consider real. You trust smoothness because interruption would be disturbing. A world that stutters would feel broken. A reality that jumps would feel artificial. So your mind rejects those possibilities before physics ever enters the conversation. This is wrong, not emotionally wrong, structurally wrong. Perception does not reveal structure, it hides it. Your senses are not instruments built to detect truth. They are systems evolved to compress information. Compression removes detail. Compression removes gaps. Compression replaces discrete events with flow. That is its entire purpose. If your experience arrived in raw fragments, you would not recognize patterns. You would not predict outcomes. You would not survive long enough to ask what reality is made of. So continuity is not discovered. It is manufactured, and once manufactured, it feels undeniable. But physics does not begin with what feels undeniable. It begins with what survives pressure. When theories are pushed hard, smoothness starts to fail quietly. Not with explosions, not with contradictions you can point to easily. It fails by becoming unnecessary. The deeper descriptions work without it. Sometimes they work better without it, which leaves you in an uncomfortable position. If continuity is not required to describe reality, if it does no fundamental work, then why are you so certain it must be there? Because you never chose the belief, it chose you, and beliefs you didn't choose are the hardest to let go. You imagine motion as a smooth passage. An object starts here, it ends there, and in between it must occupy every position along the way. This feels unavoidable. Remove the in-between, and motion seems to collapse. How could something move without passing through the space between where it was and where it ends up? This is the picture you carry, and it feels so basic that questioning it feels absurd. But this picture smuggles in an assumption. It assumes that every intermediate position is physically real. That assumption has never been tested. It has only been inherited. Consider how you actually observe motion. You never see the entire path at once. You see positions, moments, states. Your brain connects them. You think you are witnessing motion itself. You are not. You are witnessing a sequence and inventing continuity to explain it. This is not a metaphor. It is how perception works. Imagine a light blinking on and off at different locations, fast enough, and you don't see blinks. You see a moving object, nothing moved, your brain supplied the motion. Now remove the lights, remove the illusion. What remains? A list of states, a sequence of configurations. This is where intuition protests. It insists something is missing. This can't be real motion. It says there must be something happening between. But physics does not require that something. If you specify the state of a system at one moment, and the state at the next, and the rule that connects them, motion is already accounted for. Nothing else is needed, no flowing substance, no sliding through invisible points, no traversal of an infinitesimal ladder. The discomfort comes from mistaking description for mechanism. You think motion needs a continuous path because that is how you describe it, not because nature demands it. This becomes clearer when you push the idea. Ask yourself, how small can the steps be? Smaller than perception, obviously, smaller than measurement, smaller than imagination. You assume the answer is as small as you want. That assumption is doing all the work, because if there is no smallest step, then continuity sneaks back in automatically. But if there is a smallest meaningful step, the picture breaks. Then motion is not a glide. It is a succession, and succession does not require filling in every imagined gap. It only requires consistency from one state to the next. This is the first fracture. If motion can be reconstructed without continuity, if nothing observable is lost, then smoothness stops being a necessity. It becomes a convenience, and conveniences are not fundamental. You feel time moving, not metaphorically, viscerally. Moments seem to melt into one another. The present feels like it stretches, then dissolves into memory. The future approaches, becomes now, then vanishes. So you borrow a word that feels right. You say time flows. This word is never questioned. It feels descriptive. It feels accurate. But it quietly assumes something enormous. Flow requires continuity. A river does not jump. It does not update. It slides. And by using this language, you commit to a picture of time before asking whether time deserves it. Notice something unsettling. You never experience time itself. You experience change. A clock does not reveal time flowing. It reveals states changing. The hands jump, the digits flip. The oscillation completes another cycle. You connect these changes and call the connection flow. But nothing in the mechanism flows. Your sense of temporal continuity comes from memory, specifically from overlapping memory. The brain does not experience isolated instants. It stitches short windows together. Each moment contains a trace of the previous one. This overlap produces smoothness. Remove the overlap, and time fractures into frames. This is not hypothetical. Under certain conditions, neurological, pharmacological, or extreme, the sense of flow collapses. People report time as stepping, clicking, or freezing. Time did not change. Experience did, which should worry you. Because if time's flow can disappear without time itself disappearing, then flow is not fundamental. It is added. Now push the thought further. Ask what physics actually needs. Does a law of nature require time to be continuous? Or does it require an ordering of states, cause before effect, one configuration leading to another? That is enough. Continuity adds nothing except comfort. You might object, without continuous time, how do things persist? How do processes unfold? But unfolding is the same assumption in disguise. A process is a rule applied repeatedly. An update function, not a river. If the universe advances by discrete steps, nothing observable necessarily breaks. Not causality, not prediction, not explanation. What breaks is your intuition. You were taught that time must flow because stopping time feels like death, freezing, ending. So you resist the idea that time might not flow at all. But physics does not fear stopping. It fears inconsistency, and consistency does not demand smoothness. This is the second fracture. If time can exist without flowing, if now can follow now, without sliding through infinity, then continuity is no longer a requirement of time. It is a story you tell to survive it. So far, continuity has been removed gently. Nothing dramatic broke, motion survived, time survived, only the intuition suffered. Now the pressure increases. Because eventually, you stop asking what feels necessary and start asking what physics allows. Your intuition says scale should not matter. If something is smooth at one size, it should remain smooth when you zoom in. This is how surfaces behave in your mind. A table looks smooth, magnify it, and you expect a smoother table with more detail. Physics does not obey this expectation. At small enough scales, the idea of zooming in begins to fail, not technologically, conceptually. You assume space can always be subdivided, that between any 2 points, there is always another point, and another, and another. Mathematically, this is true. Physically, this assumption becomes dangerous, because measurement itself is not free. To resolve smaller distances, you must use higher energies. And at some point, adding energy does not reveal structure. It destroys it. The question, what is between, stops being meaningful, not because we lack precision, but because the act of asking alters the system beyond recognition. This is where smooth space begins to crack. Physics introduces limits that are not about engineering. They are about coherence. Below certain scales, space is no longer a passive backdrop. It reacts. It fluctuates. It refuses to sit still long enough to be subdivided, not into smaller, smooth pieces, into anything interpretable at all. The uncomfortable implication is this: continuity assumes you can always go smaller. Physics suggests there may be a smallest meaningful scale, not a smallest thing, a smallest question that still makes sense. Below that, the words distance, duration, and between lose their footing. This is not a gap waiting to be filled by future theory. It is a sign that the smooth picture was never fundamental. You can see the hints everywhere once you stop demanding continuity. Interactions occur in packets. Changes come in quanta. Descriptions stabilize around discrete transitions, not infinite gradations. Continuity survives only as a mathematical convenience, a limit you take after the fact. It works because at large scales, the steps are too small to notice, not because the steps are not there. This is the third fracture. Smoothness does not fail loudly. It becomes unnecessary. And when something is unnecessary at the foundation, it becomes suspicious, because foundations do not tolerate decoration. At this point, the problem can no longer stay outside you. If continuity is not demanded by motion, not demanded by time, not demanded by physics at small scales, then one question becomes unavoidable. Why does reality feel continuous at all? The answer is not comforting, because smoothness is not something you perceive. It is something your brain produces. Your nervous system is not a recording device. It is a prediction engine. Raw sensory input arrives late, noisy, and incomplete. If you waited for perfect information, you would never act in time. So the brain does something aggressive. It fills gaps, not occasionally, constantly. Vision is not a stream of images. It is sparse samples stitched together. Blind spots are painted over, saccades are erased, discontinuities are smoothed into stability. You do not see this happening. You see the result. The same process applies to time. Neural signals arrive in bursts. Processing happens in cycles. Memory updates in chunks. There is no continuous feed. But the brain overlays a narrative of flow because flow is useful. Flow allows prediction. Flow allows control. Flow allows survival. A world that updates in steps would feel unstable, threatening, impossible to navigate intuitively. So your brain lies to you, not maliciously, efficiently. It compresses discrete events into continuous stories. It trades accuracy for coherence. This is why continuity feels fundamental. It is not a property of the universe. It is a property of cognition. Once you accept this, something subtle shifts. Continuity stops being evidence. It becomes a symptom, a sign that your perceptual system is doing its job, which means using experience to argue for continuity is circular. You feel smoothness because your brain enforces smoothness. You believe smoothness because you feel it, and the loop closes. Physics breaks the loop by stepping outside perception. It asks what descriptions still work when intuition is removed. And again, continuity does not survive as a requirement. It survives as a shortcut. This is deeply unsettling because it inverts trust. The thing that feels most real, unbroken flow may be the least reliable guide to structure. And the thing that feels artificial, discrete updates, jumps, steps, may be closer to how reality actually operates. This is the fourth fracture, not in physics, in you. There is a moment when questioning continuity becomes impossible to ignore. Not because physics answers the question, but because physics stops accepting it. You keep asking, what happens in between? What fills the gap? What does it pass through? These questions feel reasonable. They feel necessary. They feel like how understanding works. But that feeling depends on an assumption. That between must exist as a physical thing. Physics does not promise this. In several of its deepest descriptions, the idea of an intermediate state simply vanishes. Not hidden, not unknown, gone. The system is here, then it is there, and the theory remains complete. Nothing is missing. This is where intuition panics. It insists that explanation requires a movie, that reality must supply the frames and the motion blur. That without continuity, causality collapses, but causality does not require smoothness. It requires order. This happens, then that happens. One state constrains the next. That is enough. When you demand between, you are not asking a physical question. You are asking a linguistic one. You are trying to force reality to respect the grammar of your experience. Physics increasingly refuses, not because it is incomplete, but because some questions presuppose structures that are not there. Asking what lies between discrete updates is like asking what sound a color makes. The failure is not in the answer. It is in the category. This is deeply unsettling because it removes a safety net. Continuity made the universe feel explainable. It gave you infinite resolution. It promised that understanding was just a matter of zooming in. But if there is no between, then understanding has edges. Not technical limits, conceptual ones. The universe stops being something you can infinitely refine. It becomes something you must accept in pieces. This is not a defeat of physics. It is a correction of expectation. The mistake was assuming that reality owes you continuity because your mind prefers it. It does not. This is the fifth fracture. When physics stops asking between, it is not giving up. It is letting go of a crutch you never noticed you were leaning on. At the end of this, nothing dramatic happens. The universe does not shatter. Experience does not fragment. Your life continues exactly as before. And yet, something irreversible has occurred. The image you carried, of a world that flows smoothly beneath everything, no longer has authority. Reality does not need to glide. It does not need to pass through infinity to move forward. It does not need to resemble the way it feels to be human. Instead, imagine a universe that updates, not frame by frame like a crude simulation, not in jolts you could ever witness, but in a way that does not require continuity at all. State follows state, order remains, law remains, only flow disappears. What remains is stranger and quieter, a reality where smoothness is an emergent illusion, not a foundation, where continuity exists only when steps are too small to matter, where in between is a story told by minds that cannot tolerate absence. This is not a universe that denies meaning. It denies familiarity, and that is more disturbing, because familiarity was never a guarantee of truth. It was a comfort. Physics, at its deepest, is not interested in comfort. It is interested in what cannot be removed without breaking the description. Continuity can be removed. The universe remains, and once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Every smooth motion becomes a hint. Every flowing moment becomes a compression artifact. Every sense of uninterrupted time becomes a question, not an answer. Reality still works. It just no longer needs to feel like itself, and neither do you,